Hi everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the first of several videos about brain structures. This one is about the brainstem. As we've already seen in lab, the brainstem consists of the medulla oblongata, the pons, and the midbrain. Inferior to the brainstem is the spinal cord, and superior to the brainstem is an area called the diencephalon. Let's talk about the medulla first. All ascending and descending tracts must pass through the medulla. Ascending tracts are sensory tracts, bringing sensory information from the PNS to the CNS. Descending tracts are motor tracts, carrying instructions from the CNS back out to the PNS. On the anterior surface of the medulla, you can see two protruding bulges. These are the descending motor tracts that control the voluntary movements of the limbs and trunk. These are called the corticospinal tracts. Motor neurons carrying instructions from the right cerebral hemisphere cross over and end up on the left side of the cord. And 90% of the neurons in the corticospinal tracts cross over here in the medulla. The point where they cross over is called the pyramids of decussation. Let's take a closer look at the medulla. Here you can see just the medulla. Part of it has been cut away to show the descending corticospinal tracts. As the tracts descend from the brain, the pyramids of decussation are where they cross over from one side to the other. This happens on the anterior side of the medulla. The medulla also contains many nuclei. Remember that nuclei are collections of cell bodies within the CNS. This is where synapsing and integration takes place. The cardiovascular center and the respiratory center are two nuclei found in the medulla. The cardiovascular center influences heart rate and the force of heart contraction, as well as the vasoconstriction of blood vessels. The respiratory center helps to adjust the rate of breathing as the body's requirements change. Other nuclei within the medulla also control certain reflexes. Think back to the spinal reflexes. Remember that a reflex is an unplanned but predictable series of events. Actions such as sneezing, vomiting, and swallowing are all reflexes controlled by the nuclei in the medulla. The anterior medulla also contains the inferior olivary nuclei. These nuclei are found in small oval bulges on the lateral sides of the medulla called the olives. The neurons that synapse in the olivary nuclei extend from the medulla into the cerebellum, where they help to refine your skeletal motor activity. The descending motor tracts are on the anterior side, but on the posterior side of the medulla, there are ascending sensory tracts that are bringing somatosensory information from the body. Remember that somatic sensations are touch, pressure, vibration, and proprioception. There are two ascending tracts on either side of the midline, and they are called the fasciculi. Each fasciculus brings sensory information to the medulla, and the neurons will synapse in the associated nuclei. The gracile fasciculus will synapse in the gracile nuclei, and the cunate fasciculus will synapse in the cunate nuclei. From there, the sensory information is routed to the thalamus in a tract called the medial lemniscus. You will learn that the thalamus is the gateway for all sensory information in the brain, except for smell. Once in the thalamus, the incoming sensory information is processed and routed to the proper association areas of the brain. The entire pathway, including the ascending tracts, nuclei, and thalamic tracts, is called the posterior column, medial lemniscus pathway. The medulla is also associated with 5 pairs of cranial nerves, nerves 8 through 12. The pons is the bridge between areas of the brain. It links the medulla to the midbrain and the midbrain to the cerebellum. There are 2 regions, the ventral and dorsal regions. The dorsal region is similar to the other parts of the brainstem. It contains the ascending posterior column sensory tracts and the descending corticospinal motor tracts. The ventral region contains the pontine nuclei. The pontine respiratory group works with the respiratory center of the medulla to control breathing. The pontine nuclei also help link the cortex of one cerebral hemisphere with the cortex of the opposite cerebellar hemisphere. Let's look at the next page to visualize this. The left motor cortex will send out instructions on a motor neuron, which synapses in the pontine nuclei. The new neuron continues over to the other side and brings instructions to the right cerebellar cortex. The pontine nuclei therefore helps to properly route information from one hemisphere to another. On the anterior side of the midbrain are some structures called the cerebral peduncles. These are motor tracts that convey nerve impulses from the motor cortex to the descending corticospinal tracts. On the posterior side are some structures that are called the tectum. These are projections that make up the 2 superior and 2 inferior colliculi, one on each side. The reason we care about these is that the superior colliculi contains the visual reflex centers. The inferior colliculi contain the auditory reflex center. Together, they activate the startle reflex. If you hear a loud sound or see a sudden movement in your peripheral vision, the skeletal muscles will move in a coordinated fashion to turn your head and focus your eyes towards the disturbance. Recall that a reflex is a sudden, unplanned, but predictable series of events. That's it for today. Come back for the next video on the diencephalon.